train right before we start the video. Come here, Holly. Come on, girl. Come on. Come on. Come on. Come on. Good girl. Good girl. All right. Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do pretty much every Sunday. Hopefully this is getting up on Sunday. I'm filming it on Friday morning. We've got people coming to the open garden today and tomorrow. So as you're watching this, that will have already been over with. But I don't know if I will have had time to edit this video before then. We had a crazy, crazy week. I have finished the patio I'm standing on. We actually remulched the garden, but very, very lightly. Just put a veneer on top of it so it kind of looks its best while people are here. And I went to Chicago in the middle of the week. Went up to Ball, and looked at their. They had Darwin Days. Darwin Perennials is one of the companies that is part of Ball Horticulture. Went up there and looked at their upcoming perennials they've already had released and that kind of thing. Beautiful, beautiful space up there in West Chicago. We did content in Chicago, a couple years ago at the Morton and at Chicago Botanic Garden, but I didn't get a chance to go over to Ball, so I was able to do that this week. And that's one of the things about this event here in the garden being, that I just wanted to open it and say, hey, you guys can come in and take a look at it, and I'm not going to charge you, charge anybody to do that. If you buy a t-shirt, great. If you don't, whatever. But I didn't want to charge anybody for it because the reason I was able to go to Chicago this week and do all the other things you're seeing us do, the State Botanic Garden in Georgia was part of a video this past week, and other videos in Athens, Georgia. I got another video I shot at Rams that hasn't gone up yet, and blah, blah, blah. All these things are because you guys watch the videos, engage with the videos. So I'm super appreciative of the audience I have when I'm up at Ball Horticulture and, talking to those folks and getting a tour of the place, that I'm super appreciative that you guys are the reason that a lot of that is happening. So thank you very much. Okay. The weekly garden planner will get new content this upcoming week. And I've already said that, I think we've got August shot. So right now the weekly garden planner goes through July, but August will be up in the next couple of weeks. And then the Learn to Garden video series is getting the second video from Steph's design series. Again, I said it last week, she had already shot it. This week has been, I knew it would be super crazy getting ready for everybody coming to the garden, plus that short trip up to Chicago, but it'll be up this week. And again, the event will be over by the time you're watching this video. Somebody asked about deadheading bee balm. So there's bee balm back here. This is the scarlet bee balm. Whether deadheading it will help. It does branch. So, bee balm will rebranch and you'll get some additional flowers on it if you deadhead it. I don't like to deadhead any of our native pollinator plants like this. This one's in the Lamiaceae, but any of our native asters, any of our native mints like this, because they produce a lot of seed that the birds can take advantage of after the bees and other things have pollinated them. So I don't prune any of those things because I like to see the goldfinches and other birds that take the seed later on. You can deadhead bee balm and get some branching on it. It never reblooms the same as some other things. So like if any of these salvia that are out here that I deadhead, or the dahlias, if I deadhead them, they'll all come back out and definitely bloom full on again. The bee balm won't bloom really full on. So I just leave them be and let the seeds be taken by the birds later on. This person says they take all of their containers out to the driveway when it's raining. Is that rainwater good for the microbial activity in the pots? And I talked about last week in container plants, it's a real tough life for beneficial fungi, beneficial bacteria, because the container can get extremely dry, it can get extremely wet, it can get super, super hot if that's a dark colored container and the full sun is hitting it. So it's a really tough life. So there is beneficial microbial activity in the container likely, but it's a tough life. It's not, the soil is much better environment to keep those kinds of things alive than a container. But is it worth taking your pots out there for the rainwater? Well, the one thing rainwater can give you is nitrogen from the air. So when lightning strikes, it actually releases those, most of our air is nitrogen. It actually makes that nitrogen fall to the ground in raindrops. And so the reason that you see, one of the reasons we see boost in growth in our plants, after summer thunderstorms, is because there's nitrogen actually literally falling from the sky in an available form for our plants. And so that's one benefit you would definitely get by having your containers under the rainwater rather than the city water, and not having chemicals as well. But I don't think you're going to get necessarily a boost in your beneficial bacteria, microbes in the soil. I think what you're going to get is an additional shot of nitrogen on the plants that's going to create a little bit of additional growth. I think you can see holly down here on the new patio. Somebody asked if microbial life is damaged by using synthetic fertilizers. So synthetic fertilizers are just engineered fertilizers, that man-made fertilizers that are either mined materials or nitrogen is just literally taken out of the air. So they're basically fertilizers that are manufactured to direct feed the plant and bypass the process of feeding the beneficial microbes, which actually are capable of taking care of our plants as the plants need things. So it's force feeding them, right? So a couple of few thoughts on this. Number one is most of those synthetic fertilizers contain salts, and those salts are going to build up in the soil over time, which are going to damage the microbial life in your soil if there is any. And then over time require you to fertilize more. They're going to degrade the soil in such a way over time as you end up needing more and more and more. What we think about, we have to take out what we think looks like a healthy plant out of the equation, because if you push something, if I come out here and take these annual plants, which are probably a hair smaller than you're going to see on some other YouTube channels at this point, before the season's over, they'll be big and perfect and beautiful. But if I come out here and I hit them with the synthetic fertilizer over and over and over again, visually, the plant's going to look extremely healthy. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it is healthy. It's just a visual interpretation of what we think is healthy means growing fast and dark green and producing some flowers. But that doesn't tell you what damage you're doing to the soil, the possibility of all the runoff. If you're getting heavy rains and you're doing synthetic fertilizer every week, where do you think that water's going? Where do you think those salts are going, that nitrogen's going? Nitrogen and phosphorus are extremely damaging to our waterways. So that's another reason. One of the main things, and I hope people, again, this is going to be the day after the open house. One thing I would like for folks to get out of this is it'd take a lot of rain for any water to run off this property now. This soil is very different. I mean, I can dig, 8, 10, 12 inches down, plants just as fast as I can dig holes. I mean, as fast as I can go, I can dig holes and plant plants in the ground here. The soil's changed so much. And when it rains on this, the water goes directly in the ground very, very quickly, and it's stored in the ground, where it should be. Using synthetic fertilizers is going to create, again, a type of soil where likely a lot of that nitrogen is just going to wash off, and heavy rains end up in our waterways. So there's a lot of other factors here, and I probably should do a video on I've always done the benefits of organic fertilizers and not the damage from the synthetic fertilizers. But yes, there is long-term damage from synthetic fertilizers. Basically, applying synthetic fertilizers will lead you to applying more synthetic fertilizers in the future. You're going to degrade your soil over time, and it's going to require more nutrient input as the years go by to get the same results out of it. But I'll probably do a video on this at some point. Hard to answer quickly in a Q&A, all the things that will, are damaging from it. And also the processes, right, of, most of our organic fertilizers are waste materials from agriculture that, we're looking for uses for, whether that's cottonseed or parts from, chicken feathers, or all the things, from our agriculture byproducts that we can reuse in our gardens to build soil health. The other fertilizers are, they're mined, and there's a lot of energy input going into making those synthetic fertilizers. There you go. So let me see. So somebody asked most drought tolerant trees. You know, if you're in the East, you know, Kentucky coffee trees, I see there's a couple on campus over here that are really in abused spaces, and they seem to be extremely drought tolerant. But anytime I see extremely drought tolerant as a question, that doesn't mean when you plant something initially that you're not going to need to water it for a little while to get it established. You can't just walk away normally. Bur oaks have pretty deep roots for oaks. So if you're, you know, that would be another option. Of course, if you're really looking for most drought tolerant trees, you know, like the Mexican oaks, you know, what is that, Quercus polymorpha or something like that, that's really, really drought tolerant. You know, some of the trees in the West, you know, that can go 6 and 8 months without, you know, without any rainfall and survive are kind of amazing. But again, when I get that type of question, make sure that when you put the thing in the ground that you have some option of being able to water it, you know, for a little while. But again, Kentucky coffee trees, I see taking quite a bit of abuse. But again, it's a plant that's going to need rainfall. It's going to need some water. If you're out west, you really need to be looking at plants that are either native out there or native to some place on Earth that's similar conditions, you know, to the desert Southwest. What type of grass was here before we started this project? It was actually just weedy grass. So it was a combination in the summer of annual weeds like crabgrass, and then perennial weeds out here as well. And then some noxious weeds had found their way into the lawn, like liriope and mondo grass. If mondo grass isn't where you put it originally, it's a weed. There was even English ivy out here, but it was basically just mowed weeds for about 60, 70 years, which was actually turned out to be pretty beneficial over time, weirdly, because it wasn't a place people were applying chemicals to. They weren't applying synthetic fertilizers. They weren't doing anything other than, you know, letting it grow and then chopping it off. And so it was building organic materials. So there was, that's a limited amount of foot traffic. It was only getting mowed. And so it wasn't overly compact. So it wasn't a bad deal to just keep something under seasonal weeds. It's not bad conditions overall for the soil, for the future of the soil. It wasn't constant chemicals, constant traffic, constant, there was biodiversity in the weeds. we'll put it that way, right? Is this a good spot for me to stand? Okay, you look nervous. Okay, let's see, somebody asked about prepping beds around Bermuda grass. Again, I get this question about gardening with Bermuda grass all the time. You know, it's pretty tough. One thing I would think about with beds, if you have Bermuda, is making the beds large and not having like 5 little beds. Occasionally I'll do consultations with folks and, you got Bermuda lawn and you got all these little tiny beds in the middle of it. Every one of those beds has to individually be defended from that Bermuda grass. I think a long linear bed is probably an easier line to ultimately maintain. So rather than having 5 little beds, having one large bed is probably easier defense overall. But again, you got to get it where you got to get that Bermuda killed, and really the best overall way is to spray it while it's actively growing, because I've covered Bermuda grass with plastic and other things for months and months and months and still had it come back up through. I mean, you can try the boxes and all kinds of things that you want to try. That's up to you. But in terms of prepping beds, once that Bermuda is killed, having some sort of trench edge or physical edge, a lot of people pour concrete or, edges and all kinds of things to permit, Bermuda grass from escaping. But I think a deep trench edge is probably good enough. Don't plant your plants super close to that edge, because if that Bermuda gets into them, then you almost have to dig the plants up and kill the Bermuda again and then put the plants back in. So leave a defendable border between the edge of the Bermuda and your first layer of planting will be helpful. I think gives you where you can go on vacation for a week and not lose control of it while you're gone. But again, I think if you have Bermuda, I would put plants all over there and Bermuda all over there, and not mixing the little pods of little small beds all over the place that become really, really hard to defend. Let's see. Somebody asked about air layering a big leaf magnolia, when and how. They also have an ash tree. Air layering on these trees like this is probably best done in the spring and in the fall. Most of my rooted cuttings that I did at the nursery, if I was going to take cuttings on this weigela right here, It's just about that time right now. So mid-June is one of the best times of the year, semi-hardwood cuttings. But when you're air layering, you're wounding a branch on the plant and then tying some sort of bag or some sort. They make physical little plastic clamshells that you can use for this, and you're putting sphagnum moss around it, and you're leaving it attached to the plant and then cutting it free once it roots into that little clamshell or wrapper of sphagnum moss. It can get super, super hot on the plant. It's just not a great time of year to be doing it in the middle of summer. So the air layering is best done in the spring or early fall, and other types of vegetative rooting I would be doing now. So that's my thought on that. Let's see, sedge and raised beds. It's just absolutely overrun. It came through, they put raised beds, landscape fabric in there, put their stuff on top, and the sedge still came through it. I don't know that the sedge came through it. It may have come in the soil that you actually used in the container. Another reason not to get the topsoil. I've had topsoil, things that people call topsoil come with nut sedge frequently. And once you have it, it's really, really hard to get rid of. So for me, in this raised bed, I would probably pull out the things you want to keep, and then there is a chemical called sedge hammer. I'm not using any of these things I'm telling you right now, but there is a chemical that you can spray called sedge hammer to kill nut sedge. It's good at producing seed, and there's still seed in that bed. I'm thinking probably the soil that you got for this project is where all that nut sedge seed came from. And it didn't actually come up through the fabric. Maybe it did, but I think probably it came on whatever went on top of the fabric already. The only place I have some nut sedge in the garden is over there in the vegetable garden, where I have a little more kind of exposed soil. And I just pull it, which pulling nut sedge will not get rid of nut sedge. I'm just going to tell you that right now. It's not, people know this, but I don't want to spray anything over there. I'm definitely not spraying in my vegetable garden, so I just pull it or use the shuffle hoe and try to kill it that way. But it always is popping back up over there, and it just always will. I know. But if you have something that's overrun by it, and I talked about this last week, if you got a bed that's overrun by something, you probably need to take the plants out and then get it under control, and then restart from there. Maybe burying that soil that you already have in the box in another 3 or 4 inches of some sort of compost or something that doesn't have weed seed in it will help prevent some of those from germinating for a while. But every time you plant, every time you pull a weed, this is something that's hard to teach, because I get my guys, when we were landscaping, would pull weeds and throw them out on the path, and then come back and collect the weeds. Well, the soil on the roots of that weed have weed seeds on them, from other weeds. So you just threw weed seeds out in the path, right? That's something to try. If you're pulling a weed, put it in a bucket and get rid of it as soon as possible, because you're pulling weed seeds up to the top of the soil that have been buried down there. Okay, somebody said it makes them nervous that I stand up the whole time. I do have ADHD. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious to anyone watching that I can't sit still. And I don't even realize that I've stood here for an hour, when I'm doing these Q&As. It doesn't bother me. I'm not a person who sits about. I just can't do it. Even when I'm sitting, I'm moving. It just is what it is. I know it's distracting to some people, and they don't like to watch it, and that's life. I'm not going to apologize for being me. But I would rather stand some portion of the day and stay busy doing it. Let's see. Full sun plants for a wet space. They're going to have a future patio there. They want some plants that they can plant there in the meantime, and it tends to stay a little bit wet. They had cannas with a question mark. Yeah, cannas may work. Native hibiscus, if you're in an area where you can grow any of the native hibiscus, they almost always grow in kind of wet, damp spaces like that, and then you can transplant them when you do your patio later. But that's definitely something you could use to get some color and some pollinators and some interesting things into your moist future patio space. Okay, so somebody pointed out, I was talking about last week, the Cercospora leaf spot that big leaf hydrangeas get, and other hydrangeas get, and other plants get. And this person was just pointing out that they removed their leaves from under the big leaf hydrangeas when they fall off in the fall. And I recommend that pretty much every year. And that's the kind of thing that's in a weekly garden planner. When I talk about leaving my leaves in this garden in the October, November portion of the weekly garden planner, at that same time, I'll talk about some plants that I would clean the leaves up on so that you're not, those disease issues aren't manifesting themselves. You're still gonna get it, but it can lessen the effect, because those leaves that were diseased laying at the bottom of it, those spores are on those leaves, and when it rains the next season, it's just gonna splash those spores right back up on your fresh new leaves in the spring, and probably make it worse overall. Okay. Somebody had a Carolina jessamine that got cut off to the ground. It had established roots. Will it come back? Yeah, likely. If you've seen any new growth on it. The thing when something has established roots like that, if it is able to start coming back, it's going to grow super, super fast. So if I cut this, again, we'll go back over here to this gold Weigela. If I cut this thing to the ground, it's on a root system that's 4 years old, established root system. It's going to come roaring back because it has a giant root system and a little bitty top on it. So I think as long as you start to see new growth come from the ground on that Carolina jessamine, it's going to grow really, really, really fast. So somebody this is a good question. They got a couple 90-degree days, and they started to get some burned leaves on their abelia and their barberries. Is there some sort of temperature point where there's a breaking point for these plants where they just can't stand the heat? Abelia is incredibly heat tolerant. So what happens frequently though, where we'll get this kind of burn on plants, especially in the first season they're out in the garden, is there's not enough water in that leaf to prevent that burn from happening. It's like going to the beach without sunscreen, which isn't a good idea. But if you go to the beach well hydrated, right, you're going to be much better off than a person that's dehydrated, that's not drinking water and that kind of thing. That person that's dehydrated is likely going to get a much worse burn. Both of you getting burned, but the other person, dehydrated person, it's the same thing with these plants. If you go into that 90-degree heat dry, it's likely going to cause a problem. Or the plant's so new that you damage the roots on them when you were planting them, because we do damage the roots when we're planting them, and it's just not able to get enough water up into the top of the plant versus the sun pulling the water out of the plant. So then you'll get that kind of burn on it. But it's dry for some reason. It could be that you can't possibly water it enough just because it doesn't have enough roots to support the top. If that's the case, sometimes I'll just lightly prune them a bit to put that back in balance. But both of these plants, but barberries and the abelia will adjust to it and get rooted in better. Don't start panic watering them. Once that burn has taken place and it showed some damage on the top, or it'll drop some of the older foliage, which will happen when things get dry, it's put itself back in balance. So it doesn't mean you need to go out there and start drowning it over and over and over again either. I've gotten a few questions about our bees. We had bees in the front garden last year, but when we left for 2 months in the fall and did our travel out west, they flew on us. And when we got back, I chose to take it down temporarily. I have the blocks and I have all the things to put it back up and get bees again out here. But I just knew this year was not going to be a good year for us to be out here tackling bees. So, again, they flew while I was gone and came back with no bees. Left with bees, came back with no bees. Had somebody putting had water out there. They were good to go. I don't know why they decided that they didn't like that spot anymore, but they did. Let's see. So somebody asked about sources for learning about plants. I talked about, I want to, last week about learning. I just like to continue to learn. I like to go and see, I'm visiting Buddy Lee soon, and, I like to go down there and, hang out with plant breeders and just kind of know everything about the plant, who bred it, where it came from, what were the original, the original species that made it up, and all those kinds of things, and our native plants. Steph and I do a lot of hiking, and so we go out and see, the plants out in their native, in their native habitats where they actually like to grow, other than our ornamental gardens. So, the Missouri site is just a fantastic site for learning about plants. The NC State site is a great site for learning about plants. If you have a plant question, you type in the plant, almost certainly the Missouri Botanic Garden or the NC State site is going to come up, or the Mount Cuba Center. We're going to visit the Mount Cuba Center later this year. Those are some of the sites that are going to come up that have really good information. And I will tell you, Wikipedia for plants, I don't think it's, I don't necessarily, having people updating Wikipedia, I'm sure at times can lead to things that aren't accurate, but the plant people seem to do a pretty good job of keeping up with what's going on out in the world, and it's pretty good information. Those are some of the trusted choices you can use, but familiarity with plants also comes from your interactions with them. I always find it takes me about 3 interactions with a plant in order to actually learn it. So maybe it's something I sold at the garden center, or when I was a kid. Maybe it was something I designed with and planted as a landscaper. Maybe it was something I tried to grow at my nursery, and with success or not success, who knows. But I had some interaction with it. Or maybe it was, again, planting 40 of them on a landscape job somewhere. Or maybe it's running into them in a botanic garden or in a neighbor's garden, or buying it from a garden center and planting it and having some familiarity with it. So it takes a while. It's not, I've been doing this for 38 years. And so and I can go, to the plant symposium that we had in Raleigh 2 weeks ago and learn all weekend long. So there's no ability to learn this. I mean, there's no way you could possibly learn this all, which is kind of fun to be in something where you can't actually learn it all. You can't know everything. And you can always continue to learn, but your interactions with them will build on your knowledge. Okay, somebody said weeds don't need the care that the plants do in our gardens. Why is it? So something like crabgrass coming up germinates in mid-March out here, and it just sits as a little teeny tiny seedling while it roots itself into the ground. And then the first good rain it gets, or you watering your garden, allows it to just kind of explode in growth and then seem to be overall much more resilient than the other things in your garden. Well, a lot of those weeds are annual weeds, first of all, and a lot of them are smart enough to stay in some sort of very small stage for a while they get themselves established into the ground. So we're taking 3-gallon plants and stuffing them in the ground and acting like day one that thing's supposed to be happy in that space. That's a little harder to do. If a plant seeds it, if one of these plants seeded itself into a space, you see a lot of these perennials take 2 and 3 years to actually bloom. Our native perennials, they'll sit there as a very small seedling for a while, and they're smart enough to not be this tall with no roots on them, which is kind of what we expect of the plants that we go and buy at a garden center, or by over fertilizing them in our gardens or whatever. We don't actually let them get established before we have giant expectations of them. So that's one of the things where the weeds are just kind of, anything in your garden that you don't want is a weed. So that's the definition of a weed. This palm that's, I don't know whether it's in frame or not, this palm is a weed if I don't want it there, right? So that is kind of the definition of a weed. But yes, sometimes it seems like the things like the nutsedge are just better at survival. And they are. I mean, a lot of the Bermuda grass is just great at surviving. And when it gets into a space it's not supposed to be in, now it's a weed. It was your turf grass, now it's a weed. We've designed that turf grass to be, it was bred to be drought resistant. It was bred to tolerate the full sun. It was bred to, root aggressively. And it has all of those things in it to be a weed, be a tough weed in your garden. But yes, it does have that appearance, but it's more that they're germinating in a space they want to be, and then they're just waiting for their right moment to grow. We don't allow our ornamental plants to have that same luxury. We demand that they immediately start giving us something back in return for our generosity of putting them in the ground. I guess is the way to explain that. This is a really great question that I've never answered. Why are plants in Latin? Why do we use Latin for naming plants? So the binomial naming system was invented by Linnaeus, or his name was Linnaeus or something, Swedish, but even his name is Latinized into Linnaeus. But he came up with the binomial system for naming plants. So you get a genus, which is usually capitalized, and then a specific epithet that kind of is a descriptor of maybe where it came from. And those two things together are the species, okay, of that plant. So something like Fatsia japonica. Japonica is, it's from Japan, or, areas in Southeast Asia. In all likelihood, you'll get something that maybe says chinensis at the end. Caroliniana, is found in the Carolinas and, this area. So you'll get that second word maybe gives some sort of descriptive thing to the area that it's from, or maybe some sort of description of the plant being spiny or something like that. And that's generally not capitalized. But those two things together give us the species. And then the genus, all those genera are grouped together in like things, and that's your plant families. That's where Asteraceae is the group of all of the asters, and there's dahlias in the frame. I don't know what other aster that I have behind me. Lots of asters in this garden, but there may not be any in the frame other than dahlias. I've got salvia though, and the bee balm are in the Lamiaceae. That's the family. So Linnaeus did this and did it in Latin, because Latin's a dead language, and a dead language allowed it to really be fixed. If we'd have done all the plant naming in English or Spanish or French or German or Chinese or whatever, those are evolving languages. My English in America is different than in England, where it originated, and the English in Australia is different than the English here. And so English is evolving, whereas the dead language isn't, and that kind of set it in place. And then the ultimate genius with this is, I'm out at CAST, which is the California Spring Trials, back in March, and I'm having conversations with somebody from the Netherlands or from China or from Japan or from any place on earth, and we're speaking the same language, which is the Latin names of these plants. And so it's really kind of ingenious, because it's set in place, it's not evolving, and everyone on earth has that same name. So any of these common names that I may use here in North Carolina, or they might use in Newcastle in England, or they might use in Spain, all of those go out the window when it's a group of plant nerds together and we're all speaking the exact same language. So it's pretty ingenious to have done it that way, and it's a very descriptive language. And a lot of times in the word itself, you can hear something that gives you some clue as to where it came from, or that it becomes spiny, or it produces whatever. Kind of interesting, or it's culinary in some way, or that kind of thing. So somebody made a comment about coming, to the open house, and said, the first time they came here, they didn't realize they had to ask for tea that wasn't sweet. But that's changed a lot. Now most of the tea is unsweet here in Raleigh, unless you have to go outside of Raleigh to still get sweet tea. When you say tea, you better know that it may come as sweet tea. Somebody asked about, they saw Schizophragma hydrangioides. That's a heck of a Latin name, right? Schizophragma hydrangioides. Hydrangioides part would mean hydrangea-like, okay? That would be, that specific epithet that's attached to Schizophragma allows us to know that it seems hydrangea-like. And they were looking at one called Moonlight, wanted to know if I knew anything about it. Yeah, that thing will grow super, super fast. I think Schizophragma is being actually moved into hydrangea, so it's not going to just be hydrangea-like. I think it is actually joining the genus hydrangea. Moonlight gets that silvery blue foliage on it, great lace cap type flowers on it. We planted them at a job. They've been in the video before in the past. The Schizophragma has. It's basically a Japanese, it's a Japanese hydrangea vine. So where we have climbing hydrangeas, this is a Japanese version of it. That Schizophragma hydrangioides is a mouthful, that's for sure. Let's see. somebody transplanted a Camellia japonica and it's all brown. It does have some new suckers on it, so they just should cut it down to just the suckers. They had actually scratched the bark and it is green under the bark. So no, I would leave it, see where it's actually gonna leaf out from. I imagine you're gonna get some dieback on the stems a little bit. You can just cut it to that dieback portion, the spot where it's dying back at some point, once you figure out where it's gonna branch out from. But I would leave it in place. It'll probably, most of that plant will probably come right back. Let's see. So somebody asked about their daffodils flopping in general. And ours seem to stand up big and tall. I've got a few that flop just a bit. So I think there's several things. Number one, you need sun at the right time. So this garden is extremely sunny because everything that shades it during the summertime is deciduous. My neighbors, especially my neighbor's red maple over here, which is on, the sun tracks on this side of the garden in February and January, February, March, when those bulbs are coming up. It's super important to have direct sun on them. So it's a lot of times it's, you know, if it's sunny in July, it's kind of irrelevant for a daffodil. It needs to be sunny in March when the thing's actually up and growing. And then the other thing is varieties, and also how much are you pushing them? If you're again, you know, it may look great that that they're growing big and taller than anybody else's daffodils, but it may actually create some flopping in them ultimately. So I'm careful not to push them too hard. I'm making sure the sun is on them at the right time. And then I'm sure it's somewhat variety dependent, that there are probably some varieties that stand up better, big and tall. I've never gone down that road of figuring out which ones do or don't, but I'm sure it's variety dependent somewhat. Let's see. Okay, so somebody put petunias in the ground 3 weeks ago and they really haven't done any growing. Should they fertilize them? Yes, definitely. So I talk about, I frequently talk about how little fertilizer I use in this garden, but my fertilizing is based on observation. And so if your observation is I put something in the ground 3 weeks ago and it's not growing, then that's probably time to fertilize them. I actually have some petunias in the ground over here with the same thing. They're this tall with one flower on each one. They were planted a couple weeks ago, something like that. Those need fertilizer. I can just see the difference. I'm still going to use an organic fertilizer, something that's more flower specific organic fertilizer. They wanted to know about using a slow release fertilizer, which I'm assuming is a synthetic fertilizer. So I'm not going to push them with synthetic fertilizer, but I will. So I'm observing. My tomatoes over there are growing so fast. I'm going to have a mountain of tomatoes. I mean, buckets full of tomatoes in the next couple of weeks. They're this tall. Why the heck would I need to fertilize them? There's no reason to. But if I see them start to slow down, become off color, something's going on with them, maybe I address them. So I fertilize by observation. That's my whole point there. And your observation is your petunias haven't grown in 3 weeks. Do they need fertilizer? Yes. Let's see. Any fruit in the garden? I don't know how many questions this actually is, so I got one more after this one. Is there any fruit in the garden? We have pomegranates planted. We have guava, but I'll never get the guava. The guava flower for us, but I doubt I'll ever get a finished guava unless we had a zone 10 kind of winter, which is, I guess, somewhat possible. There's several blueberry bushes down on the driveway, and we got lots of blueberries this year. And I make smoothies with the blueberries inside. I think that may be all of the fruit. Just in general, fruit is not the best thing for us to try to grow here. There are no orchards here around Raleigh of apples or pears. We tend to get late frost, which is problematic. We get really, really warm late January, early February into early March at times, and it tends to have them bloom. And then we almost always get a frost between March 15th and April 15th that can do some damage to them. So you just don't see many being grown in this area that I'm in. And again, I don't want to swim uphill. This has been something that I've tried to point out more and more and more. I don't want to swim uphill trying to grow pears here and I get 3 pears off a pear tree, probably hard as a rock, when I can go to the grocery store and buy them. But I can produce lots of blueberries. I can produce tons of, tomatoes and peppers and squash and zucchini and cucumbers and all of those things. And so I'm just analyzing it from what can I put the least amount of input into and get the most out of? You know, I don't want a $500 watermelon. You know what I mean? I don't want to build a raised bed to plant watermelons in and end up with one watermelon. Watermelon, it just, you know, I'm just analyzing it by that. What can I get the most out of with the least amount of inputs in this garden, with the least amount of fertilizer, least amount of water, that kind of thing. And if I get any pushback, it's gone. So that's kind of the way I analyze what I'm going to try to grow for food out here. And we grow a lot of food. A lot. There's a ton in the kitchen right now. I think Steph picked about 20 cucumbers yesterday. Let's see. And then last question for this week. Somebody just said, will you put a photo of the patio on Instagram? And I did yesterday. If you follow me on Instagram over at HortTube, I do almost nothing on Facebook. I think, you know, I don't like the environment that Facebook creates. They own Instagram, so I'm still, I guess, still doing Facebook just on Instagram. But I do put photos of the garden and some of our travels, and Holly usually gets a photo here or there. She's been such a good girl laying out here on this. This is supposed to be 92 or 93 today, but in the shade this morning, it's quite nice, and she's not panting, so she seems to like this cool stone back here in the back garden. So thank you guys very much. Thank you to those of you who have bought the weekly garden planner, the Learn to Garden video series, t-shirts, all those kinds of things. We really appreciate it, and it's because of those things and because of the audience, the eyeballs that are on these videos on YouTube, that a lot of things, we're able to do other things that we're able to show you on the channel. And it doesn't go over my head how important you guys are to that, you know, that part of this whole thing that we're showing off here is because of you. So anyway, thank you so much for watching, and we'll do another one of these next week. Ask questions down in the comment section below the video. I didn't say that. That's where your questions reside. Thanks for watching.